Hi, welcome back to NMA Associates On-Demand Training. My name is Michael Crane, and as you know, we bring these short segments to you to share business intelligence and general life wisdom, if you will, to help you and I reach further towards our full potential. Now, they're only about 3 to 5 minutes in duration, so let's go ahead and jump into today's session, and that is dread. Dread, that feeling that begins to gnarl up in our gut and roll around, and we wish it would just go away. Especially the dread that we feel right before we engage in a difficult conversation. Now, you and I know that difficult conversations can happen anywhere. They happen at home, they happen with our colleagues, and they can even happen with our clients. So how do we deal most effectively with difficult conversations? Well, fortunately for me, I met David Morris of Chesapeake Energy, and he shared with me that there are 3 stories that we should keep in mind before we engage in a difficult conversation, and if we'll keep these 3 stories in mind, we can have less difficult conversations. So what are those stories? Well, number 1, he shared, it's our story. Number 2, well, it's the stories that we tell ourselves, and number 3, it's the whole story. So the first one, our story. Our story refers to how we were taught and how we were trained to deal with difficult conversations in our past. Now, there are many different styles of families, but we are going to find some commonalities as to how families deal with difficult conversations. You know, for some families, we simply dig a hole as deep as we can get and we just try to bury it. We just pretend it doesn't even exist. Other families, they camouflage how they deal with it because they get passive aggressive. You know, this is where we withhold information, or we withhold feelings, or we talk about family members behind their back. And of course, we see that in office politics all the time. And then there are those families who roll up their verbal sleeves and they just get in there and they spew at one another, often making the situation even worse. So why is it important for us to recognize our story? Because how we were taught to deal with difficult conversations in the past has a way of making itself evident in the present. And it's important for us to reflect back and understand how we were taught to deal with it and ask ourselves the question, is that the most productive? And if not, choose a different course of action. Next, number 2, it's the stories that we tell ourselves, the stories that are inside our head or the voices that we listen to. It's the assumptions that we make, it's the stories that we make up about what another person is doing or saying and why. And of course, a lot of times we begin to engage in a difficult conversation from a foundation of untruth. It's simply not the truth of the matter. Case in point, recently I was going from LA to Atlanta. When I got to my flight and got to my row, I got there and I noticed now that there's a man and he is already in my seat, the window. And I could even see that he was about to go to sleep. And I thought, how inconsiderate. I began to think and listen to the voice that said, how arrogant of this guy, and I need to have a difficult conversation with this guy and set him straight. But fortunately for me, I realized it was either the window or the aisle. It wasn't about me sitting in the middle, so I calmed myself down enough to open up my laptop, put my headphones in, and begin to work, trying to tune him out. But man, those voices were talking. There were some stories being told inside of my head. Well, it was a long flight, right? And so twice I got up to go to the restroom, and upon my second return, he's awake. And he looks at me and he says this, well, I'm glad I took your seat. And he could just see on my face that I was a little perplexed and maybe even a little angry. And he said, please allow me to explain. They put me on the flight first because I'm in a wheelchair. And when I saw that they put me in the aisle, I knew that was a mistake because it's a long flight. And if they had put me here and you needed to go to the restroom, you would have had to climb over me because I can't get up and I'm a big guy, and that would make both of us feel uncomfortable. So I thought it best for you that I went ahead and moved on over to the window. And of course he says, I hope you don't mind. And my reply to him was, oh, no, not at all. Now, can you imagine the mistake I would have made if I had listened to the voices in my head and acted upon them? It's important for us not to listen, or to make sure that we're getting all the facts and not act upon the stories that we're playing out in our head, which brings us to the final one, and that is the whole story. And that is, before we engage in a difficult conversation, we need to unpack it, and we need to open it all up, and we need to look for all the variables, all the facts of the matter, and then deal with the situation with those facts, those variables in mind. Now, I know that sometimes difficult conversations can happen spontaneously, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't keep on the front of our mind, what is it that I don't know? Let's discover that first. Let's ask questions to find that out first before we engage and make a statement that we're going to regret. Well, keep these three stories in mind: our story, the stories we tell ourselves, and the whole story. And I have no doubt you will join me and we will have less difficult conversations.